Good afternoon and welcome to AmeriCollect's webinar, Return to Sender, the troubles with mail returns. Why are you getting them? How to reduce them? If you find the right party, will you even collect? When to give up and just list for collections. I am Sean Gretz, the Vice President of Sales for AmeriCollect and AmerEBO. I'm happy to be your moderator for today's session. I have the pleasure of introducing Kellen Gretz, the President and CEO of AmeriCollect and AmerEBO. But before I do, I'd like to show you how to ask a question during this session. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see an area where you can type in a question. If you should have any during the webinar, please type in a question. I will ask these of Kellen after the webinar if there is time remaining. A little background on Kellen. He has worked in the collection industry since 1988. He's been the owner of AmeriCollect since 1999. Kellen has fostered a culture of learning that has allowed AmeriCollect to be awarded as the best places to work in collections for 6 years in a row. In the last 2 years, we were the first in the nation. Welcome, Kellen.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate the introduction and very proud of our staff here at AmeriCollect being listed as #1 places to work, not 1 year, but 2 years in a row. We've got just a great culture going here. People love coming to work, and as one of my other sales guys says, happy collectors collect more money. So but something that doesn't make me happy is that the stacks of mail returns I see coming back. And I hate seeing mail returns. And then they become the priority, and then somebody hides them in their desk drawer so you don't see them. You know what I'm talking about. Mail returns are no fun at all. So we're going to talk a little bit about those mail returns. Of course, we're a ridiculously nice collection agency. We're trying to change how collection agencies are viewed one phone call at a time. Every consumer, every patient that we talk to, we're making sure that we're ridiculously nice so that they have a different view of how collection agencies can be using a sales approach, which is the win-win collections. So that's who I am. Thank you very much. Ironically, I gave a portion of this webinar in 2012, and that's a picture of our office building in 2012 when we were putting on our Phase 2 edition there. You'll see that was it. And ironically, now I'm giving this webinar some 3 years later, and this is a picture of yet the 3rd edition. So this 3rd edition that you see on the left there will allow us to grow to about 400 employees, and it's nearly done. We're thinking we'll be in by the middle of March or so, so we're excited. Here's a little snapshot of some construction workers. They look like they're working. So the colors are painted. We're excited to move in. We need more clients, of course, to help us continue changing the way that collection agencies are viewed by being ridiculously nice. Excited for my staff and my team. So let me get right into it. Of course, this isn't legal advice. Get your own attorney, right? Getting the address right the first time, it has got to be the most important thing that you think about. When you think about how healthcare providers drive revenue, you of course know the importance of making sure that things are billed to the insurance companies and your payers correctly. But the next most important thing is getting that statement in the hands of the right people so that they can pay you. Simple mistakes that happen in that process really stop your revenue. And it's important to understand why you're getting them back, what can you do differently, and what can you use with that data that when you get mail returns, how can I improve that? So getting it right the first time. Every once in a while, I like to sing a little bit of Elvis. We don't want to be singing, return to sender, address unknown. You don't want to be singing that, and I really probably shouldn't be singing it either. But getting it right the first time. A little bit about some moving data, though. So there's a geographical mobility report that the U.S. Census puts out, which I think is interesting. 37 million people moved in the past 12 months that are 1 year and older. 37 million people. So there's a lot of people that are moving. It's 12% of the population is moving. Maybe we should be in the moving business because that's a lot of the population. But of those 37 million, 67% stayed within the same county. I think that, so people aren't moving very far. So they're still your customers, but 67% are staying within the same county. So they haven't moved too far. 17 moved to a different county in the same state. 12% moved from a different state. And 2% moved from the U.S. abroad. Now, as cold as this winter's been, I'm thinking I'm going to be the 2% that moved to some Caribbean island. That's what I'm thinking. But here's something more. Renters. easily identifiable because, of course, their addresses say apartment A, apartment B, unit 17, lot, whatever, sometimes easily identifiable. Renters are more than 5 times likely to move than homeowners. Boy, when I've got someone presenting themselves or for a particular appointment or scheduling an appointment, I want to pay particular attention. I want to make sure my schedulers and my patient access people really have a good handle on that statistic. 29% of all people living in renter-occupied housing units have lived elsewhere in the last year. That's a lot of moving going on. The mover rate for people living in owner-occupied housing is only 5%. So 5% of people that own homes move. That's because you acquire all that junk and things like that. It's hard to move. But when you're living in an apartment, it's easy to move. I think it's important that you share some of those statistics with your staff to let them know that it's really important to slow down when you have someone that lives in an apartment and really clarify what their correct address is. Some of that information I got from the census, there's the website for that. Many of our clients use point of service verification by any one of these 3 companies. They're all good companies, and there are other companies that sell these products. These are credit bureau-based companies that provide point of service verification of an address. And that process might work somewhat like this. What happens is your software system has an account that comes up, or a patient presents themselves, you ask their information, you pull it up, and someone might verify their address. And that person could have you could have a software system that connects to an Experian product that you click a button and it verifies whether the address in your system is the address that they have. And if it's not, you ask deeper questions. Now that can be expensive to integrate into your software system. So maybe that's something that you're looking to do in the long range if you don't have that now. But there's simple scripting that you can explain to your patient access and your scheduling people that really gets the job done. Words like, would you please give me your address, or what is your current address, are great words to use. Great words. But even better might be, would you please give me your mailing address? I mean, there are lots of times we get mail returns because there's no mail receptacles because they use a post office box in a small town. So thinking like that, would you please give me your mailing address or your current mailing address? Never asking the question, the age-old questions, are you still at 125 South Main Street? That's not the best way. And I think you all probably know that, but reiterating it to that frontline people, because a lot of times those people are changing jobs within your organization. Maybe actually being a secret shopper and seeing how does my staff really ask the question to verify the address. Because remember, if those statements aren't going out the door, you're not collecting the revenue that you need to be collecting. So would you please give me your mailing address? Or maybe this. I will follow it up by, what is your physical address? Or would you please give me your mailing address? I need to verify the address with an external system. And I'm going to show you a couple of tools that you can use that are fairly simple to use. They might slow you down a little bit, but some tools that you can use that are free. The other thing that a lot of clients are moving to, depending on the type of provider they are, they might be asking for a photo ID. Maybe that's to cut down on healthcare identity theft, and I agree with that. A photo ID, maybe you ask it for the first time a consumer becomes a patient of your organization. I don't know how many people are asking new patients for that, but it's something that, you know, for a first-time customer, I totally understand asking for a photo ID. But if I had to go to my healthcare provider and they asked me every single time for a photo ID, every recurring visit, and I was just there last week, that might get a little bit irritating, and I could see my customer satisfaction scores decreasing. Is it necessary? I'm not sure. The other opportunity is there are tons of software systems that you load a photo of someone and then verify that they're out there. Again, expensive things, but you know, the photo ID from a mail return standpoint doesn't really help because, of course, most states' driver license, you don't have to update them for maybe every six years or every 8 years. And so a lot of people that are moving, especially remember those apartment renters, they're moving quite frequently. they're moving quite frequently, and so they're not going to update their driver's license because it's expensive to do. So that doesn't really help you out. So a photo ID may be a solution. But here's one of those free tools that I was talking about. Melissa Data is just a wonderful website. You can put in a zip code. This is my zip code. I happen to live in Green Bay. And it tells me everything about this. It says the alternate city name is Ashwaubenon, but the preferred postal name is Green Bay. It's got everything in it, the population. That's really cool. But that doesn't really help me out. But if you know the address but not the zip code, click here. This is just a wonderful tool that there's a text box that you can copy and paste right from your system and paste an entire address in there. So this is my home address. And I just write it out like that, and I click submit, and it's going to give me everything that I need. The zip code there is 54313. You could type in a lot of different things, and it's going to give you the information, but it does more than just that. If you play around, here's my house. It's covered with snow right now. But there's a lot of things that you can do to be able to find out or verify if the address that you have is the reason you're getting that address back because maybe you put the address in incorrectly, or maybe you spelled Sunray incorrectly, or maybe you had the wrong zip code. We're going to talk a little bit later about that. But it's a nice tool to use to verify addresses and verify streets. So whoever's on the back end working your mail returns, this is a great tool to make sure that the reason you got it back wasn't just a typo or a missed entry of the name of a particular street. On the front end, you can use this tool also, but again, it's a fairly clunky tool when you have a patient in front of you. Maybe a better way to utilize this tool is when the patient schedules. And so it's part of the scheduling operation to say, hey, listen, after I've made the schedule, I just plunk the address in and make sure it's a viable address. If it's not a viable address, that means that either I've got the avenue wrong, the road wrong, or the street wrong, or maybe I transposed a house number or something like that. Now, this is a free service from Melissa Data. They have a lot of free tools. If you use it a lot, it's going to ask you to buy the product, but you can very easily bypass that by deleting your browsing history, but don't tell them I told you so. I think it's important for organizations, because getting that statement out the door and consistently in the patient's hands so that you can continue to drive those self-pay dollars, to really start to measure your mail returns. And I think the best way to measure mail returns is, of course, to count the overall number of mail returns you get in a month. But I would count them a little bit separately. I would count them for first-time customers and maybe count the overall. So you're going to have two counts going on. The reason why first-time customers are important is because whoever's setting that patient up on your system has to realize that that address is going to go in your system, and it's going to go in there, and it's going to stay incorrect for a long time. Now, if that patient moves from point A to point B, if you have point A address in your system incorrect, the address correction, the national change of address, isn't going to work. So you're going to compound the issues that you have. But the rate of mail returns is important. And I know I'm going to be asked sooner or later, say, well, what's a good rate? I don't know what a good rate is because it's different for each of our clients. But it's important to get a threshold, at least a starting point, to say, how can we get this improved? The number of statements mailed monthly compared to the number of mail returns in general is a good metric to look at. But it's also a metric to first-time customers. It's going to tell you much about your point of service people or your scheduling people who are setting appointments up. For many of our clients that are maybe smaller, that are on the call, that use paper, so you give a patient some information to fill out a chart. They come there, and has anything changed on your admissions? And the address might be on there. Oftentimes, those smaller clients, if they look back, if they get a mail return, oftentimes the patient filled it correctly on the piece of paper, but it never got entered into the system with the correct address. So it's important, if you have that kind of a mechanism where the patient actually fills out updates of their information on their own on a piece of paper, go back to that piece of paper on some mail returns, grab 10 or 20 of them and see what percent did you really have that correct information. Do a little bit of an audit on your system. One of the things that I think is really important that I've seen a lack of in most healthcare systems, knowing that 12% of the population is moving annually. We do a fairly poor job in healthcare systems giving us a place to store former addresses and date ranges and times. Even our software system, which is, deals with, so 12% of the population moves annually. But I would suggest that consumers that are in bad debt, well, LexisNexis gave us a statistic a couple of years back that 50% of those accounts in bad debt move annually. 50%. Now, I haven't had an update on that statistic, but one of the things I think that's missing in healthcare system is that when you change the address, if it's a physical change of an address where a person says, I've moved from point A to point B, it should go into a logged field as a former address and log the date range in there. And so, because it is an issue, making sure that you know what their old address is and what their new address is. Too often it goes into the notes in your system. And, here's a simple note. He said his new address is 1215 South Main Street, Birkentown, Illinois, and that he is no longer living at this address on 17th Street on Kowski, Illinois, which is his mother's address. That information is a great note to read, but it's not searchable. It's not exportable. It's not, you can't do anything with it. And so when you're trying to find someone using data, if you're trying to do a batch skip trace on them, that note doesn't really do me any good. It's fine if somebody visually pulls up an account and reads it, but 6 years from now, that note's going to be buried into 10 pages deep of notes. So notes are hard to read, and so I don't know how flexible all of your systems are, but coming up with a specific way to either put a note in that means something to you, or having a window or a field to systematically store address line 1, address line 2, city, state, zip, and having those fields readily searchable so that you can do some comparative data to see what's happening. Because, again, when you start measuring the rates of mail returns, I think you're going to find that it's a bigger possible issue than you think it is. And it's an easy one to attack when you have some data to show those people that are writing the checks to say, hey, listen, we need to spend some more money on this or spend some more time auditing it. Kind of going back to the note thing, we've developed we have an even more sophisticated way now, but we've developed a special noting system. If the address changes, it's going to start with either an OA colon or an MR colon. So here's a note that says that it's an optional address. He's no longer living with mom, but he may move back there. So for us, it's an optional address. So we create 3 different codes. One is an optional address. The customer told us that the change. It doesn't mean that, he might say, well, I'm no longer living with my wife. I moved out to an apartment. But they may get back together. You don't know. So it's an optional address. And then there's an address correction. Those come from your statement provider, your vendor, your letter vendor. They give you a data file based off the NCOA database change when someone goes to the post office and changes their address. And of course, MR means that the physical mail return came back, or we got an electronic mail return, which would be a data file saying that address can't be used anymore. So I challenge you to think about how you log that data. We've gotten much more sophisticated in our company that if a client gives us an address that we've already experienced a mail return, we have a sophisticated process to say, you know what, that address is no longer any good. We'll document it in the account, but we're certainly not going to try it. And we also have an ability to say, hey, listen, our client gave us a new bit of data. We've had an experience with this consumer, say, back in 2010, but our client has a better address, so it swaps it out and puts the better address in. So we do a much better job of, we call it data logging, the addresses to make sure we're using the optimal address at the right time. And whose data is better? Is it our client's or is it our address, depending on the last interaction that we have? But I want you to think about that when you're documenting addresses and how you can store them. So there's something called the NCOA. That's the National Change of Address. You're familiar with that when you go to post office. Now you actually go online and fill it out. I think they charge you $1.05 to go online. Your statement vendor, when you send them a data file, what they do is they take that data file with the first name and the last name of the patient, or the character most likely, the address, and they scrub it. And they scrub it for what I like to call address element correction, which is CAST certified. And CAST stands for Coding Accuracy Support System. It does all of the little changes, and maybe it adds the zip +4, or if you have the street, the word street written out, and it should be abbreviated ST for that particular city, it does those little things. And so it's a great scrubbing tool. I would suggest that all of your statement vendors do some sort of NCOA. I challenge you to dig in and ask some tough questions, but really get into that data file, because there's stuff there that you may not be utilizing. There's, different, they can populate different files depending on what they're doing for you. So one of the things that the NCOA scrubbing does is do the address element correction. Then another thing is it can tell you in advance if the mail is going to be returned, that the forwarding order is expired, or maybe it's that the street address isn't a viable house number on that particular street. So there's a lot of advanced stuff that they can tell you that they will charge you a lot less money and give you a data file back with a reason code on why it was returned, instead of mailing the physical mail piece and you getting it back and having to physically handle it. And a lot of times what the NCOA process will do, the third thing it'll do, is it will give you those people that did forward their mail, and it'll forward your mail piece onto the correct address and give you the new address backwards. So there's a lot of good things that the NCOA process does. My question and challenge back to you is make sure that there aren't additional reports or elements within the data file that you're underutilizing. And not all statement vendors are created equal. Some of them really specialize in CAS certification. Some of them have good files that they spit back to you and say, hey, this group of file, man, no mail went out. You need to do a better job on getting better information. So I think that's important. Of course, when you put address service requested on the outside of your envelopes, which is the recommended thing to put on there, when you put that out, what the NCOA service doesn't pick up when they do the scrub, your statement vendor will maybe just doesn't pick it up. The United States Postal Services will pick those up at the human level, on the matching level, when they actually send it to the locale where it's going, the local post office. And that's when you get the photo of the letter with the correct card. That's expensive. Those particular address correction cards, I believe, are 50 cents. I should have looked at that. I think they're 50 cents, but that's expensive because you've got to A, wait for that card to come back. B, you've got to manually update it versus getting a data file back. So I think that's important for you to understand the whole process. Getting a little bit deeper in CAS certification, what it really does. So let's say that you mailed out an address to 2515 County Highway H in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And so you mailed that out, but really the address, according to the U.S. Postal Service, is County Highway H. So that's what it checks, those kinds of things, or it adds zip +4. I would request a list of the addresses that do not CAS certify. Make sure you get those back from the post office because they're ultimately going to be mail returns. If they don't CAS certify, that's feedback to your patient access and scheduling people that maybe they don't know your service area very well, and that all they really need to do is abbreviate county highway correctly or write it out in some situations. So request that list back. That's going to decrease the amount of undeliverable mail, and it'll give you an educational tool to those schedulers and patient access people to get the data right the first time. So another thing that NCOA file does is it tell you in advance if the mail will be returned. A person can forward their mail for 15 days up to 6 months, and then they can file an extension for another 6 months. I would suggest that most people really only forward their mail for 6 months. Once that address correction is expired, instead of you getting a data file back, so it's after 6 months, they forward the mail piece, okay? They forward that. And oftentimes you get that physical mail piece back. So it's important to make sure that your systems are using these codes correctly. The other thing that statement vendors, when they give you your NCOA address corrections back, do they tell you who moved? So you have a guarantor. That guarantor is happily married, husband and wife, but they may be going through a divorce. Who stayed in the house and who moved? You may be mailing the address to the responsible guarantor, but they may have 2 accounts at your office. That data file, that when the patient fills out the address correction at the United States Postal Service, they put in if it's an individual move or it's a family move. If it's a family move, you know that you can update other people within that family that may be patients of yours. If it's an individual move, you really need to only update the patient that was addressed in that statement that went out. So the NCOA database has a lot of additional information in it that you may be underutilizing. Is it a family move or an individual move? Questions to ask your statement vendor about how most statement vendors don't own their NCOA database, but they use a third-party company to scrub it. You want to ask questions like this. And so remember how they get paid. The statement vendor gets paid for every hit that they get off the NCOA database. That means that they may have an incentive to keep stale data. You want to ask questions like, how often is this data refreshed with the United States Postal Service? Is it updated monthly, every week, every day? So if I'm a consumer who's moving and I use the online portal, how quickly will it be in my NCOA vendor's database? Is it 7 days? Is it 10 days? And then how often is that data refreshed? And then do they back out stale data? Most vendors, NCOAs, store the stale data for 18 months from the last day of the month the change was processed, so that they're keeping it for 18 months. That's a typical general. But ask the question, are they keeping old data so that they can charge you more money? Or maybe you want that, but I doubt that you do. And do they have a history of the old data? And then the other question is how does their matching mechanism work? If the patient's name is Robert and you have it in your system as Bobby, would it match the 2 names? Is it smart enough to do that? And can the matching mechanism system be system-wide or by client-specific? So those are questions, and I've got some examples of the matching in a little bit in another slide if I'm going a little bit too quickly on that. The whole question is, are you leaving data on the table? Important data to get statements in front of patients so that they can pay you more money. I wonder how many accounts we get for collection that you had a mail return and we very easily find an address and we send out one letter and they say, well, I never got a statement from the hospital or the provider. And we hear that now and again, and I wonder, I have no real way of knowing this, but I wonder, how much money are you leaving on the table because you haven't examined why you're getting your mail returns. So here's the matching mechanism that I was talking about, just giving you some examples here. So let's say that your outbound mail, in your system, you used the name Ronnie Barker, but when he filed it at the United States Postal Service, that he used Ronald. And actually, it's probably the reverse of this is true, that you probably have the formal name of Ronald. I'll make this a little bit bigger. You probably have the formal name of Ronald, and he probably filled it out Ronnie because that's what he goes by, except his brother once in a while calls him RJ. So those, you need to look at those kinds of things. When you get that white postal card back in the mail that the NCOA didn't pick up, really examine them and see what the difference is on why the NCOA didn't pick it up but yours did. Well, here's a situation where your mail may be Mary Smith okay? But she filled out the address correction as Smith Hanson, and she moved because she got married to a nice guy named Jim Hanson. So, or here's an example of the names match, but the address is a little bit different. And why didn't address element correction pick up and realize that the correct name, the correct address is South not written out, but the initial South for South? Little things like that is that when you start studying those white address correction cards and say to yourself, that cost me 50 cents versus maybe the 10 cents that your statement vendor is going to charge, and it's an electronic process, that's a big difference. That's a big difference. And you're getting the statement to them more quickly. Matching examples. Excuse me. Another thing I think that's important to remember is that when you get that paper address correction card, you have to say to yourself, why isn't my statement vendor? I suggest scanning some of them in, say 10 or 20 of them, and forwarding them to your statement vendor and asking them, why wouldn't the NCOA process pick these up? Why am I having to manually do them and pay 5 times as much? And you get a bunch. And maybe you should start counting these and saying, my goodness, we're getting 200 of these a month. Maybe we should only be getting 100 or so. And if so, what is it telling you? It could be telling you a lot of different things. But start questioning your statement vendor about why you're getting so many paper address correction cards. Many of our clients utilize 2 different systems. Hospital systems that have one system for physicians and one for the hospital. And one of the hardest things to do is making sure that both of the systems have the same data in them. It's easy to build a process. We do this for a couple of our clients in our extended business office, Amera EBO. So you could always ask the question, do you have another account with us at the hospital? But they might mean that to mean I don't have any active accounts. A simple process is having your 2 systems export a nightly file of all of your patients that compares the data jointly together. I'll show you what I mean here on this one. So it's a simple process, a string compare. And so this is your hospital system data over here. So you might use a common denominator, which would be the guarantor Social Security number, or you could use the patient Social Security number. It's not going to be perfect because, of course, not all of your patients have Social Security numbers, but a lot of them do. And what you could do is you could compare the string of data and say, do these 2 match? So does the string of the clinic system match? And every night you run this, and you'll see that this one doesn't match because it's got Pittsville. Same city, same zip, same state. But someone could then review them and say, oh my goodness, we updated it on the clinic system, but we never updated it on the hospital system. You could turn this into a fairly easy automated process that the 2 systems really do kind of communicate with each other nightly by simply comparing data elements every night. And it should be fairly simple to do. Something to think about. A very easy way to make sure that both systems have the correct. And as our extended business office, we do see a decent amount of the 2 systems not having the same information. Those of you that are trying desperately to get your email-generated statements up and at them, congratulations to those of you that have more than 5% of your patients getting email statements. Of course, eventually someday you may want to mail them something, and the problem with continuing to email them is when patients move, they tend to keep the same email address, but they don't tell you when they have a patient physical move, when they move from one address to another. And one of the easy ways to do that is a MailPay solution that maybe every quarter, or maybe you send something to them that's value added for additional services, but that has address service correction on them every 3 months or every 6 months. That's one solution to make sure that you're staying in front of those that have emails, because of course they're not updating their email address with their physical address. Another way to do it is to subcontract directly with the NCOA database providers. There's probably 20 NCOA database providers throughout the country that you can subcontract with directly. You don't have to go through a statement vendor to do that. And they'll gladly take your data and charge you to verify that. So for those that have email statements, what's really important is to understand a little bit about how the process works. So when you, whether you have you're sending first-class mail, which most of you are sending first-class mail, it can be forwarded for up to 12 months at no charge. That's the 6-month and the 6-month extension. During the months from 13 to 18, the mail is returned to sender with the new address. That's the little yellow sticker that you get on it. That address on that yellow sticker is still good. It's just that the post office is done forwarding it for you. This is their mechanism to say, hey, you need to take the address off the yellow sticker and then forward it to yourself or change it in your system and then resend out that statement. After 18 months, the mail is returned to sender with the reason for the non-delivery attached, but there's no new address. So that's how you get the mail returns. And so when you're starting to get mail returns that have that sticker on it, that tells you that your patient access is really doing a not so very good job updating and getting the correct address from the patient when they're making the appointment, or the patient is not doing a good job with telling you about it. The yellow sticker has a bunch of codes on it that are important, but there's really only 2 or 3 of them that are really important. There's a T here which says that the move is temporary. So this might be for your people that decide that they're going to go to Florida for the winter instead of staying in -5-degree weather here in Wisconsin. So they're going to go temporarily to Florida. So that's what the T means. Down here, you're going to see a little dash after the word Smith. That tells you that it was a family move on this little yellow sticker. So there's a little indicator that you can see what kind of a move it was. Was it a family or an individual? So that's important. And then, of course, the date processed. So that's the date it was processed. This little code tells you the class of mail in the first one. And then the 3 remaining codes gives you the effective date. Okay, so how long was this order on file? And it's got a little bit of a code there. Teach your staff to read it, what's necessary. Probably the only thing that's necessary is to realize the difference between an individual, family, and business, and to figure that out. So you've got a pile of mail returns, and you've got to say to yourself, what do I do with these mail returns? The easiest. So some people didn't forward their mail on purpose because they're not planning on paying you money. So they don't want the bad news coming to their doorstep, and they purposely didn't give you that. It's real hard to figure that out on who they are. But I can tell you that it's easier to pick off the easy ones. All mail returns are not created equal, just like all cuts of beef are not equal. I mean, I know what kind of meat I like. I would love a tenderloin versus a brisket or a chuck. So how do you pick out which mail returns are easiest to work? How do you do that? Well, I'm going to give you some codes, and this was sent out. All of these are called endorsements. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger here. These are all the different types of endorsements. So the easiest way to do it is to say to your staff, you know what, this is why it was returned. Those are easy. Insufficient address. That just means that someone from your organization didn't do a good job writing out the complete address. For this particular, the solution is easy. I'd go right to Melissa Data and throw in the address, and it's going to come back with a suggested better address. It's a pretty easy one. Work the easy ones based on the reason code, which is called the endorsement, on why it didn't. No such number, I can guarantee you what happened there. The street probably exists, but there's no such house number in that street. It's probably because somebody typoed an 8 and a 3, or typoed a 7 and a 9, or a 9 and a 6. Those are easy ones to solve. So what I'm suggesting is that as you're sorting your mail returns on which ones should we work and send off to collections quickly, and which ones should we handle ourselves, get your staff trained to follow the easy ones. You know, those, and so I have these on here as easy, hard, medium.
And some of these you hardly ever see. Focus on the ones that you see the most often that are easy. The hard ones, of course, are the ones where they're refused. That's a really hard one. Or that it's vacant. They gave you a vacant house number. What the heck happened there? Or that the return to sender due to address use violation of from this violation of postal false representation law. I'm sorry, that guy's not going to pay you. He's violating U.S. Postal Service's laws. So I hope you like that tool. It's kind of a neat spreadsheet to get your arms around a little bit. Will you see an immediate lift? Is it going to be measurable? Maybe, maybe not. But having this conversation with the people that handle your point of service, your scheduling, and that actually work the mail returns will help out. If you decide that you want to hire a vendor to skip trace addresses for you, one of the most important things is that they don't put you on a wild goose chase. So let's say you hire a vendor. We use companies like LexisNexis, which is also known as Accurant, or TLO, good companies, excellent companies. Make sure you ask for a product that you really want. And so if you gave them a patient's name, date of birth, social security number, and the address that was mail returned, let them know that you want the single best address. The single best address. You don't want one that they used from 2 years ago or 3 years ago. That's going to put you in a loop, and you're going to waste time getting your accounts receivable out the door that really should be out the door. Many of those companies have dates, last date verified of the address. So you might say to them, I'm looking for a custom search that says, I want every address that has been verified for this patient in the last 3 months. And it's solidly verified, not reported by a collection agency, but reported by maybe a bank or a lender or something. So use those tools to make sure that they're not giving you data that kind of puts you in a spin. All of a sudden, you're going to see your accounts receivable ballooning to the top. So I see here that we are out of time. I came in just in time, actually. It's 1:44 Central Time. So we really appreciate all of you that attend. We've had nearly a record attendance for this particular webinar. If you have specific questions on how to handle your mail returns, remember a good deal of these people the mail return came because they don't want to pay you. My suggestion is get them out to your collection agency, let them use their analytics to be able to find the addresses. Our next webinar is going to be offering patients payment options. We're going to talk about giving them options. Patients pay faster when they get to choose their payment terms. We're going to talk about the win-win dialogue and how it does that. I'm excited about it. It's Tuesday, April the 7th, right after April Fools, so that ought to be exciting. If you'd like to register, there's the link to it, or 2 weeks before, we will send out a link for you to. Again, AmeriCollect thanks you. Help us fill our new building here. 6-time winner of Inc. magazine's fastest growing privately held company. We made that 6 years in a row. I hope we can do it again for this coming year. And most importantly, our coworkers really enjoy working together. 6-time winner of Inside Arm Best Places to Work in Collections. So proud of our team here. Thank you again for joining us and being good fans of AmeriCollect. Have a great day.